Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds. A simple sentence, but spoken by a man who understood exactly what those words meant. Who said this? And why would one of humanity's brightest minds feel compelled to speak like this? A brilliant scientist, a visionary, a creator of something so powerful, it fundamentally altered human history. And then, for the rest of his life, a man grappling with what he had done. The irony of intelligence is that it rarely saves you from regret. It only helps you see it more clearly. This isn't a history lesson. This is about something happening right now, around us, in boardrooms, laboratories, and policy rooms, where some of the most intelligent people alive are facing the exact same collision that he faced, between what they know and what they're responsible for. There's something that happens when intelligence reveals something you cannot unsee. When you understand the full scope of what you've created, when you comprehend not just the immediate consequence, but the cascading effects that will ripple through decades, centuries even, that knowledge doesn't fade, it becomes part of you. The existentialist philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre said we are condemned to be free, that every choice we make with full responsibility for its consequences. There's no escape clause. There's no hiding behind circumstance or ignorance. Once you've truly understood something. Oppenheimer stood at the Trinity test site. He watched his creation detonate. In that moment, he didn't just see a bomb, he saw the future. He saw what this technology meant for humanity. The arms races it would spark, the existential threat it represented, the wars it might enable, and he couldn't unknow it. To see too far ahead is its own kind of blindness. When you understand the future before it arrives, you stop seeing the world as others do, and that isolation becomes its own madness. That's the burden of knowledge. Once you've seen something, truly understood it, you carry it. You can't pretend it doesn't exist. You can't convince yourself you were ignorant. Today, this same burden falls on many. The same pattern has haunted every generation. Scientists convinced they're serving progress. Executives insisting they're serving freedom. Economists claiming they're serving efficiency. Tobacco was once public health. Finance was once economic liberation. And now AI is human advancement. Each began with intellect and ended with hubris. They all knew, and knowing created a burden they couldn't escape. The question isn't whether they're aware. The question is, what does a person do with knowledge they cannot unknow? This is where wisdom diverges from intelligence. Intelligence gathers information. Intelligence understands complexity. But wisdom is what you do with that understanding. And sometimes wisdom means accepting a burden you never wanted to carry. Brilliant minds see more clearly than most, but there's a price to that clarity. When you understand something deeply, you often see not just one truth, but contradictory truths, existing simultaneously, and your mind is forced to hold both. The psychologist Carl Jung spoke about the shadow self, the parts of ourselves we don't want to acknowledge, the consequences of our actions we'd prefer to ignore. But he argued that integration, accepting both the light and dark within us, is essential to psychological maturity. The same applies to understanding our creations and our choices. Brilliance isn't protection from contradiction. It's often the reason for it. Oppenheimer lived in this tension constantly. He believed, genuinely believed, that building the bomb was necessary, that without it, Nazi Germany might develop nuclear weapons first, that the stakes were existential, so he pursued it. He used his genius in service of what he saw as a necessary defense. And yet, in the same moment, he was horrified. He understood the destruction it would cause. He grasped the implications. He saw a world change forever. Two truths, both real, both occupying his mind simultaneously. Cognitive dissonance doesn't belong only to individuals. It scales from one mind to entire civilizations. Corporations, nations, even cultures live in denial. Convinced their progress excuses their damage. The intellect becomes a shield against conscience. Consider the financial engineers who designed complex mortgage products before the 2008 crisis. Many were intelligent enough to understand both truths, that these products could generate enormous wealth and that they were fundamentally unstable, built on sand. Both known. Yet the products were created and sold anyway. Or the researchers who know their pharmaceutical product could cause serious side effects, yet also genuinely believe it helps more people than it harms. They hold both truths. The internal conflict is real. The toll of holding these contradictions is significant. You cannot simply choose one and ignore the other. You cannot pretend the positive aspects exist without acknowledging the dangers. This is the burden of a clear mind. Maturity isn't about escaping contradiction. Maturity is about seeing the full truth and choosing to act anyway, with open eyes. We often believe that good intentions lead to good outcomes. If you build something with the right motivation, if your heart is in the right place, the results will reflect that. It's a comforting belief. It lets us act without paralysis. But reality is more complicated. The philosopher Hannah Arendt, writing about how evil operates in the modern world, noted that catastrophe often emerges not from malice, but from thoughtlessness, from intelligent people failing to truly think through the consequences of their choices. The gap between intention and consequence often widens because we don't stop to genuinely imagine the effects of our actions. Oppenheimer's intention was clear: prevent Nazi Germany from developing nuclear weapons first. From that lens, the work made sense. It was defensive, it was necessary. But the consequence, it was a nuclear arms race that lasted decades. It was the Cold War. It was a world where human extinction became a normalized threat. His intention, prevention. The consequence, a transformation of human civilization. The gap between them is vast. That gap is where morality lives. Not in what we meant, but in what we caused. Today, this gap exists everywhere in intelligent decision-making. The architects of the Vietnam War believed they were defending freedom. The consequence was devastation. The founders of social media believed they were connecting humanity. The consequence was division. The gap between intention and consequence is where morality truly lives. Intelligence should mean you anticipate these gaps. If you're brilliant enough to create something, you should be brilliant enough to foresee the second and third order effects, the unintended consequences, the ways your creation might be used differently than you intended. Yet often, brilliant people proceed anyway. This is the intelligence trap, knowing enough to foresee disaster, but not enough to stop yourself. The question that haunted Oppenheimer was, could he claim ignorance? Could he really say, I was just a scientist doing technical work? Philosophically, the answer is no, because knowledge doesn't just inform you, it implicates you. He knew what he was building. He understood its purpose. He grasped the implications. He was the architect, the visionary, the leader, and he knew. Knowledge creates responsibility, whether we want it to or not. The philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre spoke of radical responsibility, that we cannot escape our choices by claiming ignorance or inevitability. Once we know something, we're accountable for how we respond to that knowledge. There's no neutral position, and that's uncomfortable to accept. We want to believe we can contribute our expertise and claim distance from the consequences. But that illusion crumbles the moment we possess knowledge. The tobacco scientists who saw the data and stayed silent. The executives at Wells Fargo who knew about the fake accounts. The engineers at Volkswagen who coded deception into their software. They all knew, and knowing carries weight. Responsibility scales with knowledge. More knowledge equals more responsibility. It's exponential. The more you understand what you're capable of creating, the more accountable you become for its consequences. This isn't about blame, it's about honesty. If you know something, you're responsible for knowing it. You can't unknow what you know. And that knowledge carries weight. It demands that you think seriously about what you do with it. So, for you watching this right now, what do you know that you're responsible for? What information do you possess? What capabilities do you have? Because the principle doesn't change at any scale. Knowledge creates responsibility at every level. But responsibility doesn't end with what we know. It extends to what we choose to do with that knowledge. Just because we can do something doesn't mean we should. It's perhaps the most fundamental ethical principle, and yet the one most frequently ignored. In Oppenheimer's era, the question wasn't, can we build a nuclear weapon? The answer was already yes. The real question was, should we? But once the capability existed, it gathered momentum. Once the path was clear, the should we got drowned out by the we can. And so the bomb was built. It proved that mastery without morality is just a faster road to ruin. The Stoic philosophers, Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, Seneca, taught us to distinguish between what's in our control and what isn't. They preached restraint, the courage to choose not to act, even when we could. For them, true power wasn't the ability to do everything possible. It was the wisdom to do only what's right. The pharmaceutical industry can aggressively market opioids to doctors. But the question isn't can they, it's should they? The fossil fuel industry can keep extracting coal and oil. They have the tools, the capital, the technology. But should they? Knowing what we know about climate change, military strategists can deploy drone strikes that kill civilians. They can do it. But should they? Progress has a gravity of its own. Once an idea exists, someone will act on it. The question is never whether it will be done, only who will do it first. And that's how humanity ends up in a race to the bottom, with technologies nobody truly wanted, practices that carry enormous risks, all because we could. But there's a difference, a critical one, between intelligence and wisdom. Intelligence asks, can we do this? It solves technical problems. It makes the impossible possible. Wisdom asks, should we do this? It considers consequences. It thinks about values. It has the courage to say no, even when saying no means someone else might do it instead. Wisdom is rarer than intelligence, far rarer, and infinitely more urgent. The decision makers, the leaders, the researchers, they must cultivate wisdom alongside intelligence. They must ask not just can we, but should we? And then have the moral strength to answer honestly, even when the answer is no. There's an inescapable truth about power. It carries culpability. When you have the ability to influence the world, when your decisions ripple out and affect millions, you become responsible for those effects. You don't get to opt out. Oppenheimer had immense power. His vision, his leadership, his choices, they shaped world history. He couldn't escape that. The scale of his work demanded that he face the scale of his responsibility. The sociologist Michel Foucault once observed that power operates not just through force, but through systems. And those who design those systems share responsibility for their outcomes. Think about it. A CEO of a major bank might never personally defraud a customer, but the culture they create, the incentives they design, the ethical corners they allow to be cut, those have consequences, and they bear responsibility. The social media executives, they didn't personally harass anyone online, but they built algorithms that amplified outrage and division. They're responsible. Pharmaceutical executives didn't personally misuse opioids, but they funded campaigns that downplayed addiction risks. They're culpable. Today's researchers and leaders in powerful fields face the same truth. AI researchers and tech leaders are shaping how billions of people think, what they see, what they believe. The systems they build influence human thought at unprecedented scales. That's power, and with that power comes unavoidable responsibility. Biotech scientists working on genetic technologies, they're reshaping human biology itself. That's power. That's culpability. Climate scientists, policymakers, corporate executives deciding environmental futures. They hold power over planetary systems that affect billions, and that power demands responsibility. Many intelligent people hold on to an illusion, the illusion of distance. I'm just a researcher doing technical work. I'm not the one making policy. My responsibility is limited, but that's false. If your work touches the world, and it does, you're responsible for thinking through its effects. Maybe not solely responsible, but never exempt. When the first mushroom cloud rose, Oppenheimer whispered regret. When the markets crashed, the bankers blamed the system. When AI misfires, we'll say we didn't know. But we always know. We just prefer not to feel responsible. The difficult maturity is accepting that culpability, not in a way that paralyzes you, but in a way that keeps you honest, that makes you think carefully, that drives you to advocate for safeguards, for ethics, for wisdom, to accompany capability. You might be thinking, this is about famous scientists and powerful leaders. What does this have to do with me? The answer is everything. Because every decision, no matter how small, echoes somewhere. You may not be building bombs or writing algorithms, but every action you take shapes the moral climate around you. You have knowledge, you have capabilities, you have power in your own sphere, whatever that sphere is. And that power carries the same principle. With knowledge comes responsibility. Maybe you have expertise in a field. Maybe you understand something that others don't. Maybe you have influence over others' decisions, even in small ways. Maybe you have access to information that matters. That's knowledge. That's capability. That's power. A manager who knows their company is cutting corners on safety has knowledge. A colleague who sees someone being treated unfairly has the capability to speak up. A person who understands the addictive design of a social media platform they work for carries responsibility for that knowledge. And every time you make a choice with awareness of the consequences, that choice carries moral weight. This is what the collision between intelligence and responsibility looks like in everyday life. It's the employee who knows their company's product is harmful and has to decide whether to speak up. It's the friend who sees someone making a destructive choice and has to decide whether to intervene. It's the person who witnesses injustice and has to decide whether to act. At every level, the same dynamic. Knowledge creates responsibility. Capability demands ethical consideration. Power carries culpability. The question isn't whether you're responsible, it's whether you'll admit it in time to change the outcome. Will you acknowledge the weight of your knowledge? Will you take seriously the consequences of your choices? Will you cultivate wisdom alongside your intelligence? Will you ask, should I? Not just, can I? These are the questions that matter. Not just for world-changing scientists or powerful leaders, but for all of us, because we all face the collision between intelligence and responsibility. We all have choices to make, with awareness of consequences. We all have the opportunity to act with wisdom or to hide behind the fiction that our actions are neutral, that our knowledge doesn't matter, that we're not responsible. But deep down, we know better. Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds. You understand now why a brilliant mind would say those words, why a man who created something unprecedented would spend his remaining years grappling with that creation, why knowledge and capability and power would weigh on him so heavily. Maybe the true tragedy of intelligence isn't what it creates, but what it realizes, too late. Oppenheimer faced the collision between intelligence and responsibility. He couldn't escape it. None of us can. But perhaps that's not a curse. It's an invitation to think carefully about what we create, to consider the consequences of our knowledge, to choose wisdom alongside capability, to accept responsibility, not as a burden, but as the price of being alive in a world where our choices matter. The collision between intelligence and moral responsibility isn't something to avoid. It's something to navigate with honesty, with care, and with the recognition that what we do at every scale shapes the world we all inhabit.